But that's a lot of money. You know, I'm curious. Who here would vote for your landlord to represent you in Congress? Show of hands. Who would vote for their landlord to represent them in Congress? I don't see a single hand. Why does the city of San Francisco keep electing a landlord to represent them in Congress? Nancy Pelosi is a landlord. And, I find it hard to understand why someone who is a landlord, I'm going to switch mics here. I find it hard to understand how someone who is a landlord could actually effectively represent the interests of people who are renters. Most of the people who live in San Francisco, is San Francisco a majority landlord city?
It's for rich people. Only.
No, I think the majority of people in San Francisco are renters. Why do renters keep electing a landlord? Or there's someone who is going to be challenged, or is challenging Nancy, and he's not a landlord. And he's going to be joining us here today in a little while, Shahid Buttar. And just to be clear, obviously, I'm with Movement for a People's Party. He's running as a Democrat. We're coming from different teams, but we have similar goals, and we have similar values, and we have common interests. And so we're cooperating on these demands and targeting Pelosi because that alliance can be powerful between people on different teams. And that's what Movement for a People's Party is really all about. There's so many organizations and groups and people coming from different teams. We all need to get together for our common goals. And so Movement for a People's Party is actually, we're a coalition organization. We're looking to bring together a broad coalition of many, many different grassroots, local, progressive, labor, etc. organizations to come together on what is our shared values and our shared goals, things like Medicare for all, things like a Green New Deal, things like, these really, really popular policy positions. And we're trying to form a coalition so that we can coalesce and form a new political party together that can actually challenge the Democrats and the Republicans. Because I can't tell you how many times I've talked to people who, from all over the political spectrum, who actually support Medicare for all, who actually support the Green New Deal, even people who identify as conservative, but would have, for instance, voted for Bernie because of his common sense, policies. And what we want to do is to form a party that's for the people, that supports these common sense policies that would benefit everyone in the working class in the United States, and put the well-being of regular working people above the interests of the corporations and the billionaires. A party that will actually work for regular people and exemplify those values. We're supposed to have a government of, by, and for the people, and we do not have that. And that's not going to change unless we change who's in government. So that's what we're trying to do. Anyway, yeah, let's have a little break. We'll play a song or two. Woo! We are But it was extremely difficult, I'll say, to find out like where her actual residence is in San Francisco. We went to a couple of these addresses and they were vacant houses. And there's a bunch of addresses that we found between her and her husband, the properties that they own, and as someone said, like $46 million worth of real estate in San Francisco.
120.
Someone else is saying 120. I don't know. These are just numbers that people are throwing out. I don't know. It's a lot of money. Either way, it's a lot of money. But yeah, so why does San Francisco keep re-electing a landlord when the majority of people are renters? She does not understand what regular people are going through right now. And perhaps she doesn't care. But what's for certain is she's out of touch. Anyone who saw that ice cream video knows that Nancy Pelosi is completely out of touch. What kind of public figure, when you're being asked, oh, how are you coping with the lockdown and the pandemic? They go, oh, I just have this $1 million freezer full of like Haagen-Dazs and Godiva ice cream, and chocolate ice cream makes me feel better, and so that's what I'm doing right now. Like, how can you think that that's the right way to respond unless you're completely clueless to how that message is going to be received? She does not get that message doesn't resonate with regular people. So, I think that folks like Nancy Pelosi live in such a bubble that they really can't relate to the concerns of the average person. Did someone actually pause the video and calculate that?
No,
Oh.
It's like 30 cups of really, really nice, expensive ice cream.
Yeah, it's like 30 pints of like $10 a pint ice cream.
And while there were people who were calculating and realizing they weren't going to be able to pay rent in 2 months, people who didn't have jobs and shit, it's like, damn, man.
Yeah, do you want to come? Absolutely, I agree with you. You want to come take the mic? You want to come? Do you want to come talk? You have good points. All right, well, this gentleman was saying, when you're looking at that video, you can see Nancy Pelosi has like at least 10 or 20, 30 pints of this like really fancy ice cream that costs like $10 a pint. So it's like there's $300 of ice cream in her freezer. And you have people watching that video who are thinking about like, oh man, I don't know how I'm going to pay my rent next month. And Nancy Pelosi has like $300 worth of ice cream in her freezer. I need $300 just to like buy some regular groceries, let alone the fancy ice cream, right? So how can people possibly think that this is a person who can represent their interests? Someone who's in the position of being a landlord has completely different priorities than someone who is in the position of being a renter. I don't know, do any of you have landlords who are just like, oh, they're so selfless and they're always like putting you first and like, oh, they're always so sensitive to your needs and like what's gonna work for you and how to make sure that you're okay? Anybody have a landlord like that? No. So
I have building managers like that, but not landlords.
right, maybe your building manager sometimes. But yeah, so what is the job of being a congressperson? You're supposed to be a public servant. You're supposed to be of service to your constituents. I don't know any landlords that act like their job is to be of service to their tenants. So how would someone who's a landlord make a good representative in Congress? Anyway, so that's just one of the several demands that we have for the next stimulus bill. To move on to the next one, in addition to freezing rent and mortgage payments, we demand that we freeze credit card and student loan payments. Because how can people possibly be paying for their student loans and their credit cards when they can't work? They can't even be in school right now. Students who are taking out loans for a degree that they haven't even completed yet, if they're not able to go back to school, they're going to be, if you don't freeze this, they'll be required to start paying on these loans when they haven't even completed their degree yet because they can't go back to school. We need to suspend those payments for everybody, freeze student loans, and freeze the credit card payments. Many people have been using their credit cards just to get by. You know, if you have credit to begin with. I know I don't have a credit card. People have been using their credit cards to get by, to pay for things they need, sometimes in some cases to pay their rent, you know. And people are maxing out their credit cards. They're gonna need some help. We need to cancel those payments. And then the final thing that we're demanding is that we demand that the government cover the payroll for small businesses. So small businesses that can't operate right now, the government should pay the salaries of those folks who are out of work so that those small businesses can stay afloat and those people can keep their jobs instead of...
The small business I work for got totally screwed out of small business stimulus.
Absolutely. That's absolutely right. The small business stimulus loans for the previous bills that they passed that were supposed to help small businesses, you know who that mostly helped? Corporations and what's that? And Pelosi's husband. What was it? $2 million? $2 million of that money went to Nancy Pelosi's husband. Boo! Woo! All right. Shahid's on his way. Woo! Finding loopholes that support whatever they want to get out of something.
They'll never pay it back. They'll
What's
never
that?
pay it back.
And apparently they're not going to pay it back. Are they going to get out of paying it back the same way as how you're saying? System so that they don't even have to pay the money back. So what do we call that? You know, if somebody lends you some money and then you don't pay it back, and you also borrowed it on false pretenses, then what is that? It's stealing. They're borrowing money from us under false pretenses, and then they ain't gonna pay it back. They're stealing. They're stealing from the public. And you know what? When we've had these demonstrations all over the country where, you have desperate people who they are breaking into stores, they are taking things they need. And that it sucks that people are in that position. But the media goes and they call it, oh, they're looters. Oh, they're looters. Not just like desperate people taking things, they're looters. And then when we talk about the corporations and the billionaires that are taking things they don't need from people who are suffering, that's us. Why aren't they called looters?
They're the real looters.
They're the real looters.
Nancy, you can't hide. We can see your greedy side. Nancy, you can't hide. We can see your greedy side. All right, I'm going to introduce Chris, who's communications person for Shahid's campaign. Woo! Hello, everybody. Thanks for coming out today. This is a great show, great showing for Shahid Buttar for Congress, for people's stimulus, for a Green New Deal, for Medicare for All. I just want to say a couple of quick words before the main event comes in. We've had the same member of Congress for more than 30 years in San Francisco. We have never had a debate. Pelosi has not agreed to a debate yet for any candidate running. And Shahid is the first Democrat to appear in a runoff against Nancy Pelosi in those 30 years. Clearly, the writing is on the wall that the time has come for change in San Francisco. Shahid has a great op-ed in the Chronicle that appeared yesterday, if you want to look it up. It's about Pelosi's history of supporting the expansion of policing and militarization. She has not only not voted or led the way in the right direction, she's actually supported the criminalization, the militarization in America. She voted for the crime bill in 94. She still defends her vote for the crime bill in 1994 now. Even Joe Biden has apologized. So what we need to understand about Pelosi is not just that, she's been around a long time, we want to change. It's like, what do we think about when we think about San Francisco? We think about environmental movements, we think about healthcare for all, we think about justice for workers, we think about pro-peace and cutting the military and cutting police, defunding police. Nancy Pelosi doesn't represent and has never represented any of that. And it's in her record. This is not rhetoric, this is her actual record. So she's actually not a liberal. Maybe the country looks at her as a liberal, but here in San Francisco, for the actual city that she represents in Congress, she does not function as a liberal. So please check out our op-ed in the Chronicle, Shahid's op-ed in the Chronicle yesterday on policing. And I'm going to pass on the mic without further ado so that somebody wants to introduce Shahid. I'm just so excited to work on this campaign, and I hope that all of you are either on board or will get on board. And thank you for being here today.
Thank you. So as I was saying, San Francisco doesn't have to put up with continuing to re-elect a landlord to be their representative in Congress the way they've been doing for the past couple of decades. There are alternatives. And the other person that's going to be on the ballot come November is a gentleman named Shahid Buttar, who is not a lawyer, but an activist, someone who works in our communities, who understands our communities, who is a lawyer and, I think I'll let him tell you a little more about himself. So here he is, Shahid Buttar.
Thank you so much for coming out, y'all. I want to give a shout out to Movement for a People's Party. I want to give a shout out to everybody who's here from Humanity First and Humanity Forward. It's a theme I want to press on here is the variety of communities that I think you all come from. So just to lay this out here, raise your hand if in the presidential primary you supported Joe Biden. Let's do that. Okay, fair enough. Kamala Harris. Okay. How about Tulsi Gabbard? Yeah, fair enough. There's Tulsi folks here. Andrew Yang. It's got to be some Andrew people. Bernie. Right. Just in the spirit of open arms, Liz. It's not crazy. A lot of Liz. I'm inviting Liz supporters to raise their hands if they're any with us. So the point here is that whoever we might have supported in the presidential primaries, the movement to demand universal health care, the movement to demand that we cancel rents and mortgages, the movement that demands that we finally defund the police and the Pentagon to make available the resources to secure our basic needs. These are needs that have been persisting for decades. None of these are new problems, which is why it is particularly poignant to reflect upon the 30-year record of an incumbent who has refused for that long to appear in public and defend her record. And even if you didn't care about the substantive demands for universal health care and student and other debt relief, even if you didn't care about avoiding the coming eviction calamity and further compounding an already generational economic collapse, preventable eviction rate by simply canceling rents and mortgages and letting banks and corporate landlords who we bailed out before bear the cost of housing during an economic shutdown, instead of forcing working Americans with their backs to the wall, already suffering from generations of racial disparities, to risk contagion and fatality just to put food on their table and stay with a roof over their heads. These are policy choices, and they're policy choices that for 30 years have been made by a wealthy commercial landlord in San Francisco who has refused to answer her constituents. And I'm very proud, I'm frankly astounded by the fact that I am the first Democrat in 30 years to give this city an alternative choice in November. And with your support, I'm looking forward to liberating the seat. I'm very grateful to the 33,000 people who voted for our campaign in March, the 25,000 people around the country who are funding our campaign, the 5,000 volunteers who signed up to volunteer with us, and the hundreds who are phone banking with us every week. I'll say this while we're together, though I don't want to make our campaign the focus. If you haven't yet signed up to volunteer, we'd love to have you. You can do it online, shahid.fyi/volunteer. There's actually a training going on online as we speak for a couple dozen people who signed up earlier in the week. We'd love to have you. Check out the website, share it. I want to make a point, though, clear. If we are successful in liberating our city's voice in Washington, what will happen next is the liberation of one seat in the body of 435, which is to say, as much as I offer us the opportunity to gain a voice in Washington finally aligned with our city's principles, casting a ballot is never going to be enough to fix our problems. And I want to invite all of you to redouble your commitment to what you're doing right now, which is to say, getting out of your chair, showing up, and using your presence, using your network, online, offline, using yourself as a vehicle to promote a brighter future. We can all do that when we come together in the service of, the values we're talking about here. Universal health care is the difference between our civilization making a policy choice to kick sick people into the street after we've let them drive every penny in their wallet and bank account, versus letting sick people recover from illness, secure in the fact that we collectively have their back. That's a commitment that every industrialized country on the entire planet has already made. How can we claim to be a land of the free and a home of the brave when we are the one country in the world that refuses to grant health care as a right? And as long as I have the mic and tell me when to, feel free to do the trick with the cane when you grab somebody by the neck and just pull them off. I'm happy to pass the mic at any point. But if we are here, I do want to just maybe a couple reflections on the defund the police movement and the demand we have. It's among the people's among the people's stimulus demands. And the reason that we say to defund the police, and I want to unpack what it means. It's not just taking police off the street, though it's that too. It is putting in place better alternatives, more effective alternatives at securing public safety. In too many neighborhoods, it is the police that people need to be kept safe from. And that's not hyperbole. We've seen that demonstrated. How many videos, how many names must we say before? It's already been too many, right? It had been too many before. And every 28 hours, there's a new name to add to the list. And we are done adding names to the list. We are done waiting. We are done with trainings. We are done with baits and switches. We are done with reforms. And we are to the point now where our civilization across races, across ages, has demanded to defund the police and reinvest our collective resources in things like social workers, in housing for all, in food for all. If crimes of desperation were not necessary because our social needs were met, how different might the need for police look in the first place? If we ameliorated poverty instead of criminalizing it? That's what police are there primarily for, is to criminalize poverty. That's a policy choice. Why are we criminalizing poverty, y'all? San Francisco doesn't want to do that. Why has our voice in Washington been voting for that for 30 years? And then has the audacity to show up wearing kente cloth, kneeling in Congress, refusing to defund the police, and then declining opportunities to debate and defend her record. Are you okay with that? I think I started this point before and I never finished it. Even if you didn't care about universal health care, and you didn't care about civil rights, and you didn't care about defunding police, and you didn't care about arbitrary state violence that leaves innocent people dead in the street once every 28 hours, even if you cared for none of those things, if you merely cared about democracy, and the principle that our government is supposed to answer to us, we, the people. You might want your elected representative to show up for a debate once in a generation. Forgive me for being flippant. It is hard sometimes to even take seriously the fact that we are in this position. Good looking out, solid. Shahidforchange.us. Check us out.
Well, lucky for you, we scheduled a debate today.
All right.
Yeah, we scheduled a debate today, and we were hoping that we would be able to get Nancy Pelosi to come. There's still a minute. She might be able to come, but we'll see what we can do. We're gonna have a really brief intermission with some fun music before we get our debate started. I do want to see if maybe we can just have like this area clear out a little bit and have people like just sort of surround, and we'll actually like have the debate stage like right here. Are you okay standing in the sun, Shahid?
Oh yeah.
Is that okay for you?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I represent San Francisco and our city's visionary values. And San Francisco is a town committed to human rights. We're committed to peace and justice. We're committed to immigrant rights. Those are all values that Nancy Pelosi has unfortunately undermined during her tenure in office, and she seems, based on her record, to represent corporate interests in Wall Street first.
All right, for real this time. It's time for the main event. Our town hall social distancing debate with Shahid Buttar and Nancy Pelosi. Now, it seems that one of our debaters hasn't come to our event today, which is very unfortunate. And we would have really liked to see her. I do have, there's one thing that we might be able to get her to come out with. I thought this might happen, so I brought some chocolate Haagen-Dazs. Nancy, are you here? We brought you ice cream. It's chocolate. It's your favorite. Come on, Nancy. Well, yeah, I thought that might work, but unfortunately. Yeah, no, I should have got the they were out of the Godiva, so I got the Haagen-Dazs. I guess it's still not good enough for her. Yeah, we'll just. If normal people can afford it, she doesn't want it, right? All right. Well, we're just gonna have to move on. The debate can't. The debate can't wait. We're just gonna have to hold the debate without her. And so this is an empty chair town hall with Shahid Buttar and Nancy Pelosi's ice cream.
They seem to appreciate it.
All right. So, as this is a town hall, does anybody have a burning question they want to start with? All right, sir. In the Black Lives Matter t-shirt. Yeah, let me have this. Yeah. Okay.
So my question really has to do with, so over the course of the primary in the 2020, we saw so many different things, from how the fucking mainstream media fucking railroaded Bernie Sanders and his entire campaign. Not only that, how fucking hundreds of thousands of provisional ballots are destroyed every time. We have massive voter suppression in college, minority, and poor areas, and then you won't stand up here and tell us that Bernie got the nomination stolen from him, that it was rigged? What game are you playing? Why will you not become a socialist like Kashama? Why will you not put your fucking money where your mouth is?
I am a socialist, like Kashama.
Are you registered?
Yes, in
Why are
fact.
you running as a Democrat?
I was actually I was a delegate from DSASF to the National Convention in Atlanta before running for office.
You are a registered Democrat.
You might check your facts, sir, but I appreciate your question.
Our democracy has been eviscerated for decades, and to the point about our election legitimacy, our elections were hacked years ago, and they've been hacked in the open, particularly by right-wing voter suppression techniques invited by the Supreme Court. In 2013, in the Shelby County decision, the Supreme Court struck down Section 5 of the Voting Rights Act. And better if I move back. In 2013, the Supreme Court struck down Section 5 of the Voting Rights Act. And in the wake of that decision, which basically took the teeth out of the signature victory of the civil rights movement, right-wing legislatures, Republican legislatures in states around the country started predictably attacking voting rights. You don't need a computer to hack an election. Republicans have been hacking elections for years, and Democrats, frankly, haven't done much about it. There's a variety of ways beyond that in which our elections are compromised. Let's start with campaign finance. Has everybody noticed that the average contributions to corporate incumbents tend to be something on the order of like hundreds, if not thousands of dollars? My opponent outspent us 15-1 in the primary, and I don't actually know what her average contribution is, but I know that when you look at her list of people who have maxed out, it goes on for pages and pages of people who are writing $2,800 checks to Nancy Pelosi. Our average contribution is $20 because the people supporting our campaign are the people, not me, us, looking for basic human rights, looking for the vindication of our basic needs, looking for housing for all, looking for education for all, looking for free public college, looking for climate justice, looking for racial justice. These are the values that our corporate incumbents predictably don't support because of who they raise money from. That's in the pre-election phase. There's another problem with campaign finance, which is after the election. So this gets into lobbyists. So people are familiar with corporate lobbying as a phenomenon. In any congressional office or committee dynamic, there'll be any number of proposals, most of which will have been concocted, contrived by some corporation, usually organized in the American Legislative Exchange Council, ALEC. And these proposals get written by industry and then voted on by those industry's patrons who are legislators in Congress. And so we've got campaign finance problems before the election. We've got corporate lobbyists dominating the process after the election. The elections themselves, if you look, I think, to our young man's concerns, this spring, any number of the states that Bernie did not win reflected fairly dramatic divergences from exit polls. Exit polls, which in foreign countries, we use as the basis to assess legitimacy of an election. And when the exit polls diverge from the official results, that's a problem that in any other country we would say renders the process and the result suspect. That hasn't happened here. It is worth exploring. The last thing I'll say here is that a lot of people are focused on election security. I, particularly as a congressional candidate, am named by the National Security Agency as a target for foreign intelligence agencies because they recognize congressional campaigns as under-resourced, basically, attack surfaces. And having worked for the Electronic Frontier Foundation, I have a somewhat more sophisticated awareness of this landscape than most, so I don't particularly think of our campaign as a vulnerable target, but I do think of the idea of, as we move into an election, that by virtue of the pandemic is necessarily being shifted. Here in California, we have mail-in ballots are well established, but in many parts of the country, they're not. In that flux, and the change from an established practice to another is an opportunity both for us as a movement to dramatically expand not just voter turnout, but our engagement of communities that haven't necessarily heard a progressive and a radical message before. And it is also an opportunity for the right wing to do some really nefarious shit with the process. So I'm just inviting us, to whatever extent our ally is concerned about the primary process that just finished, this November is going to invite any number of further attacks on the integrity of our process that we should be alert for and anticipate. And I want to be clear about this, as a campaign running for office, we don't have the resources to guard the process, right? I'm running to win an election. I can't conduct one too. And so this is also an invitation to all of us, because if there is to be a defense of a process, I'm thinking particularly of 2000, when the media called an election and the legal process deferred to it. We got a war as a result, a right-wing Supreme Court, a deference to fossil fuel industry, and our civilization ducking into the punch of climate catastrophe. That was the result of the Bush versus Gore decision. I'll wrap it up in 10 seconds. If there is shadiness in November, we will need popular resistance to the outcome to hold our institution accountable. Thank you.
Thank you. Yay.
Thank you very much. Speaker Pelosi, what do you have to say about voter suppression in this country? This is fun though. Who's having fun?
Yeah.
Woo, we're having fun. Okay. All right. So, does anybody have a question about any of the demands that are part of why we're having this event? Does anybody have a question related to like the coronavirus pandemic, the stimulus bill that's coming up? Who has a question about that they would want to ask the candidates who are running for the seat in this district?
Or you, yeah.
Like you said earlier, you're running for one seat in 460, 480. What would you say to people who feel like all this is falling on deaf ears, and even if we have a victory, it's just a drop in the bucket at this point?
Right. So I'll, to your point and then the counterpoint, 435 seats comprise the House of Representatives, and anything that body passes needs then to pass the U.S. Senate, which has a structural overrepresentation of rural right-wing states. So the democratic process is slow. Frankly, by design, the founders set it up that way to constrain popular will. That's why that is the entire reason that the Senate exists as an institution. On the other hand, when we see, people remember 2 years ago, Ocasio-Cortez, when she won in New York, do you remember the media cycle and the cultural narrative that unwound as a result? I ran in the same cycle as Representative Ocasio-Cortez on a very similar platform. We weren't as emphatic around climate issues, and we were more emphatic around defunding the police and surveillance issues. We got as many votes in our primary here as she did in New York, and we're back now to finish the job. When she knocked out the number 2 Democrat in the House, do you recall the cultural moment that it indicated? When we knock out the leader of the Democratic Party, the Senate will remain as an obstacle, but there will be a seismic earthquake across Washington for at least 3 independent reasons. The first is that she is the strongest among the corporate Democrats, and if they can't defend the strongest among them, every single one of them knows that they are vulnerable, right? The message they learn then is they either show up for our communities, they either show up for universal health care, they either show up for rent relief, they either show up for climate justice and racial justice, they either show up to defund the police, or we will show them the door.
Yeah.
There's a second reason it scares the Democratic Party, which is that I am an immigrant without any property. I don't own a home, I don't own a car, I own a bicycle, and I am perfectly content with that. And I am challenging an oligarch. There is a class dimension to this struggle that I want to make very explicit. And I understand that maybe it's insufficient for our young ally with his concerns. But, to challenge as someone with no property, someone worth $100 million and a corporate political party behind her, I am the closest thing I've encountered in real life to a David confronting a real Goliath. And I understand what a sling looks like. And a disembodied sling is the legion of supporters behind us that is going to win us this victory in November. She doesn't have that. The third reason that it will be particularly transformative is that the Speaker of the House wields immense influence, and if it's the Speaker replaced by a voice particularly like the one I would support to replace her, Barbara Lee in Oakland, bring the weight of the House of Representatives to bear on behalf of we the people for the first time in a generation. So that's my answer to people who are disillusioned. This is one seat in Congress with a gateway to the House. That's what's ultimately at stake.
Thank you very much. Yeah, again, Speaker Pelosi, are you here? Do you have anything to say? All right, no, so genuinely, you know, if Nancy Pelosi was here and we were having a debate between her and Shahid Buttar, and I mean, obviously, probably everybody here would already have their mind made up, but, you know, like, well, I have a question. So why don't I'm the debate moderator, I'll ask a question. How's that?
I do want to say I'm sincerely interested in your question, so please, like, take advantage of this opportunity. Go ahead.
All right, so, you know, given that we are in a financial economic crisis that is the biggest crisis that we've seen since the Great Depression, it's bigger than the 2008 financial crisis, you know, this is the biggest thing we've seen since the Great Depression, and the highest level of unemployment, and the biggest funneling of wealth to the corporations and the billionaires that we've seen in a long time. And, you know, this crisis is being exploited by the corporations and their lobbyists and their relationships with our members of Congress. What would you do what law would you pass to make sure that shit like this can't happen in the future?
There's several, and I want to welcome. I think there's a couple structural pieces, and then there's policy specific pieces. So the first way we make it happen is by putting people's needs first. The CARES Act prioritized tax breaks for billionaires and millionaires before rent relief. Why is that? Right? And this is just a spending priorities question. Appropriations bills come before the House. You can vote against bills that don't put the people's needs first. Ilhan Omar has a proposal to cancel rents and mortgages. Nancy Pelosi hasn't supported it. She supported other things in the CARES Act, like the $1.6 million tax breaks each for 43,000 millionaires. That is a prioritization implicit in the spending process. There's another piece of this which is structural, and that relates to, again, the corporate lobbying influence. We can have restrictions on corporate lobbying beyond the meager, toothless disclosure requirements already in place. At the moment, there is a revolving door between K Street and the Hill. It's a predictable path for retired legislatures to pursue, is go work on K Street and represent some corporation or industrial group, and because you know all of the legislators, because you just spent the last 10 years working alongside them and going to the gym with them and hobnobbing with them, you can. I'm an immigrant myself. My family had the remarkable fortune and it is a fortune, and I think about the likelihood of it, it's akin to winning the lottery, to come through a legal process. It's not a widely available opportunity. And particularly when you think about the genesis of this country and its path to prosperity, it has lied in the warm embrace of immigrants. I feel on a visceral level the implication of the new Colossus. It's the poem that we've inscribed in stone at the base of the Statue of Liberty. This country is the world's tired and poor yearning to breathe free. That's what we are. And frankly, people dragged here from other places and forced into servitude, right? It's a part of our history we can't overlook. And the vestigial remains of a civilization that we waged a relentless and continuing genocide over. Civilizations, just to be clear. But that notwithstanding, we are, in spite of our criminal president's rhetoric, a land of immigrants. And to make this really sharp, ICE is akin to a Gestapo. And when we think about the ways in which attacks on immigrant rights are gateways to attacks on the rights of all Americans, I want to tell you a quick story about the Next Generation Initiative. Has anybody here heard of NGI? I see one head nodding. Do you want to give us 10 seconds? No? Okay. So in classes, I like to do that to keep it like Socratic, right? So in the mid-2000s, I was, starting in 2009 until 2015, I was leading a civil rights organization called the Bill of Rights Defense Committee. One of the principal challenges of the immigrants' rights movement at the time was a program called Secure Communities, SCOM. The Secure Communities Initiative was branded by DHS, ICE, and CBP, Customs and Border Protection, as an immigration enforcement initiative. And the idea was to take fingerprints of people who are arrested for criminal offenses by local police departments, run those through federal databases, run the fingerprints through federal databases, and then fast track the deportation of people suspected to be both suspected of some criminal offense, so they've been booked, and suspected of being undocumented. The problems of this are severalfold. One, we were deporting people en masse who were not convicted of any criminal offense. Getting arrested and booked that's based on suspicion. There's no adjudication there. Cops arrest people randomly all the time. I'll say that again since the mic inconveniently cut out. Cops arrest people randomly all the time. That's part of why we have to defund them. But I want to make this point really clear. The other reason that this program was really problematic, it took litigation. A bunch of immigrant rights groups had to sue. The National Day Laborers Organizing Network based in Los Angeles and immigrant rights clinics at Cardozo Law School in New York, and there was another one, I can't remember where. But they sued DHS, and they got documents proving that SCOM, the Secure Communities Initiative, it wasn't a DHS program. All good, no worries. It wasn't a DHS program. It wasn't an ICE program. It wasn't about deporting people at all. That was just a pretext. That was the wedge to create a biometric tracking system that was never limited to immigrants. If you're running all the fingerprints of all the arrestees through a database, is that limiting it to immigrants? They were just checking it against immigrant databases. They were collecting everybody. And the FBI now has 500 million biometric records, including photographs drawn from Department of Motor Vehicles photo records. Your driver's license photos have been co-opted into FBI biometric databases that began using immigration enforcement as the public pretext. So when I say to abolish ICE, I'm not just talking about defending my rights as an immigrant or the rights of other immigrants. I'm talking about defending the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic. Thank you.
All right. Who else has a question? I'm just going to show of hands. Who else has a question that they want to ask? All right. Let's go over here. Ma'am, what's your question? Mike, this mic has a range problem. So you want to come up to the mic.
Yeah, let's just hit faces on it. If that's not too much trouble. Thank you.
Okay. Although I signed your petition in the filing fee, and I'm agreeing because I wanted a challenge to Nancy Pelosi. I'm for peace, and she keeps voting yes on the war budget. And I come from a country that has been at war by this country for many decades. It's the Vietnam War. In Vietnam, we call it the American War. Do you believe in cutting back on the military-industrial complex to fund needs of the people, such as food stamps and Medicare or Medicaid for all?
Hell yeah, I do. It's why I'm running for office. Absolutely. I've been to Vietnam, and I've been to the museums. It chokes me up to talk about this, where they commemorate the American War. It is horrifying, y'all. Like, whatever we learned of it as peace activists, it's so much worse than that. It is generations later, and there are people being born without limbs because of our slavish dedication to military contractors. In this case, Monsanto. Like, you might have thought that Monsanto was just poisoning Americans through the food system, but no, it's leagues worse than that. It is heinous what we have done in the service of our imperial objectives. Vietnam was one among too many countries that this country has perceived as opportunities for extraction. I want to be clear about that. We are talking about corporate resource extraction at the end of the day. That is the motive. And what does that facilitate? Climate chaos. It not only murders people in the present, it kicks the future off a cliff. We are talking about death in multiple dimensions. It's so much worse than we realize. And particularly when we think then about all the domestic social needs that we're not getting met. Who remembers them telling us that we don't have money for Medicare for all? Horse shit. We have money for Medicare for all. They're wasting it on a nuclear program. Right. Who are we supposed to use that against? Does that actually support anyone's objectives? Who does that keep safe?
There's a program. Let's talk about this real quick. The F-35 Joint Strike Fighter, as long as you ask about military spending, fraud, waste, and abuse. The F-35 Joint Strike Fighter will cost $2.5 trillion with a T dollars over the life cycle of this program. It's an advanced fighter jet that's supposed to have radar-resistant capabilities that are already obsolete because, in particular, China already has advanced alternative detection that doesn't rely on the same radar technology. Which is to say, we are designing, in fact, we're building, before it's been finished being designed, a plane. The entire the fleet is going to cost $2.5 trillion. It's obsolete before it was built. In the course of building it, they ran into so many cost overruns, it was described by one of its proponents as procurement malpractice. We have real national security needs. They include fighting a pandemic. They include climate chaos. The Department of Defense recognizes climate catastrophe as a national security risk. They include the need to make sure an election happens in November in spite of the machinations of a criminal tyrant. How many of those things can you fight with a fighter plane? Why are we wasting $2.5 trillion on a fighter plane? Have you been to the Tenderloin recently? Let's get some of that money in our communities. Absolutely. It's long overdue. I dare say that the question you're raising is the principal failing of the incumbent. It's what drove me to run for office in particular. And if I may just one more second, Eisenhower, President Eisenhower, I have colleagues who've encouraged me not to talk about this because nobody remembers him. President Eisenhower was the supreme commander of the Allied forces in World War II that liberated Europe and kept the world safe from the Nazis. He was the US president. He said his last act in public was to warn us that all of this would happen. He said, the military-industrial complex is coming for democracy, and unless you stay knowledgeable and alert, he didn't finish that, but he might have forecast paramilitary police, subjecting millions of Americans to legal slavery in the service of an industrial slavery machine. That's what mass incarceration is. And we should recognize that the role that the national security agencies played in constructing it. Maybe this is the I know I'm going to shut up after this, but Gary Webb is worth remembering. He's another name people forget. Gary Webb was a journalist from here in the Bay Area who uncovered this secret history of the CIA running crack cocaine into US cities in the 90s. He documented that when US cops were dying in US streets in the 90s, it was the CIA training and equipping the narco traffickers doing it. And instead of those people or the CIA ending up bearing the penalties for this corruption, the CIA now, 30 years later, continues to have a classified budget. It's evolved entirely new generations of human rights abuses to compound those before. The DOD's budget has only continued to grow, and every problem in the Tenderloin has grown worse.
And then they make a movie about it. Like
Thank you, Nancy Pelosi.
Yes, thank you for the question, and thank you for those responses. Obviously, like we could continue to ask Nancy Pelosi if she wants to answer, but she doesn't have any answers to any of these questions. But I want to offer a follow-up question, right? And let's keep this like a 90-second follow-up question.
I have a tendency to chase that.
That's perfectly all right. But I want to cover multiple things today. But so my follow-up question that I have personally is, so given that we have this pattern that we're observing. So one of the things we're demanding today is defunding police. We've got grossly overfunded police, and this prioritizes in our society, we're funding punishment and control and that kind of way of addressing how do we have order in our society, versus we're underfunding supporting people, we're underfunding schools and social services and giving people the things that they need so that people are taken care of, and we avoid chaos in our society in that way, right? So there's two different strategies. You can try to beat down social problems, or you can try to help people and actually address social problems. And what we're seeing is that we have this at the local scale, right? We have this at the local scale where we're overfunding police and we're underfunding social services. We have it at the state level. California is better than some states, but We even have it in California here at the state level. Things are prioritized. Rather than prioritizing people's well-being, we're prioritizing other things. And then at the national level, what's the thing we fund the most at the national level? It's the military, right? Is the military actually helping people to have a decent life? No, they're not. So what do you think, and again, let's keep it just a follow. What do you think is the reason, like, behind the fact that we observe this pattern in our society? And what do you think could be done? What do you think could be done to resolve that, and so that we don't have this pattern in our society?
Capitalism is the problem, breaking the role of money in politics, replacing corporate incumbents, building the capacity for a general strike. And just to unpack that, a lot of people are clamoring for one. I'm all for it, and we have to build the capacity for it. A general strike requires being able to fulfill our community's needs without requiring market-based services. So it means that all of our critical things like food production, delivery, housing, transportation, medicine, we need to create community alternatives so that we don't need for-profit enterprises to do those things. When we have community childcare collectives, that's when we can execute a general strike.
Thank you. Okay, show of hands. Who else has a question? All right, let's go right here.
I have a very specific question about the Patriot Act and Nancy Pelosi's continued extensions, which was supposed to happen in March of this year, but got postponed. What is your response to the Freedom Reauthorization Act of 2020? And what can you do to not only prevent bills like that from passing, but proactively pass bills to protect us from government surveillance?
Yes, thank you. I was the principal spokesperson for the Surveillance State Repeal Act, proposed in 2010 by Representative Rush Holt. I spoke at the last congressional briefing I spoke at was promoting it as an affirmative repeal of the Patriot Act and the FISA Amendments Act of 2009 that extended it. The recent bill doesn't go nearly far enough in protecting civil liberties. We have the principal protection that we need for civil liberties is already the law. We just violate it routinely. It's the Fourth Amendment to the US Constitution. And it says that no one shall be subjected to unreasonable searches and seizures. And yet, we have a mass surveillance apparatus that searches everyone indiscriminately all the time, effectively. That's what data collection is, while we have national security agencies dancing on the heads of legal pins, claiming that by collecting your emails or your communication, they're not actually searching you until somebody looks at it. It's like the Schrodinger's cat theory of surveillance. That's actually what they get away with it. That's the governing law of the land, and it has been for a generation. Welcome to Orwell. Or worse yet, Kafka. Under Orwell's analysis or fears, at least there's like a discernible body on the other end that's pulling the strings. In Kafka's world, it's just random. And that's much more what we live in. When I got a chance to talk about the reauthorization of the Patriot Act this spring with an independent journalist from New York by the name of Walker Bragman. And within 10 minutes of our interview finishing, YouTube censored the interview. They took it down off the web. He hadn't recorded it locally, so it was effectively deleted. No one at YouTube or Google said, yo, silence that guy. It's some computer, it's a server in a locked room running an algorithm that was just like, okay, no, this is bad. They said the word coronavirus, can't have that. That's Kafka. That's the oppression and tyranny of randomness. That's governance by entropy. And to your point, we need affirmative legislation that recognizes our constitutional commitments and effectuates it instead of creating alternatives and end runs around them for government agencies. Thank you. Even short of the affirmative legislation, I want to make this clear. At no point in the last 20 years has the government complied with the even very permissive laws under the Patriot Act. At every point, the NSA, the CIA, the FBI, ODNI, the CBP, ICE, every one of those agencies has been stepping well over the legal limit. And just to be clear, the legal limits are very permissive. The legal limits are authoritarian themselves. And when you have agencies claiming powers beyond them, that's the story of how the mass surveillance apparatus started. That's the story of every ICE initiative in the last 20 years. It is always executive action eroding rights with deference by the judicial branch and ignorance in Congress. And the last thing I'll say here is that one of the fights is for transparency. In too many cases, we don't even know these things are happening. When we were talking about the CIA contriving a drug war and sending millions of Americans into prison, nobody knew that was even happening for 10 years. And then when they found out 20 years ago, Nancy Pelosi did nothing about it. But the fight for transparency, torture, is another CIA abuse that started after that. Nancy Pelosi is demonstrably complicit in it. She was read in as early as 2002 in the CIA's enhanced interrogation program. We fought a world war to establish a treaty commitments, the law of the land, requiring the investigation of any credible allegation of torture. And what did our democratically elected Speaker of the House do? Sweep the evidence under the rug and continue to do so. And so this is part of the transparency fight, the fight for transparency in the face of government secrets, affirmative legislation to effectuate our constitutional commitments, and aggressive oversight to shake these secrets loose into the public sphere.
All right, I think we have time for one more question.
Yeah, at some point we got to get on the move to start dancing, y'all, because we're definitely standing too still at the moment.
Are we trying to turn this into a dance party?
Well, we got a sound system and a band. So I'm a DJ. You can put the DJ in Congress, but you can't put the Congress into the DJ. How does that work?
You can never take the DJ out of the Congress.
Thank you. That's what I'm trying to say. I appreciate your help there.
You can take the Congress person out of the DJ, but you can't take the DJ out of the Congress person.
Yes, exactly.
All right, so
Was there another question? I saw some hands up.
yeah, I mean, there's a few more people who have questions, but I mean, how long? So let's leave it up to let's have a poll.
Democratic
Who
process.
who wants to still do like one more question? Show of hands. Who still wants to do like two more questions? Who still wants to do three more questions? All right, I think we're gonna stop at 3 questions because some people started putting their hands down. So we're gonna take 3 more questions. Who has a question?
I got a question.
All right, hold on. I'm just trying to make.
Still
Okay.
in America?
Okay, so what's your question, sir?
The discrimination is still in America?
Does discrimination still exist in America?
Discrimination is rampant, pervasive in every direction, in housing and employment. Discrimination is woven into our national fabric. It remains.
But discrimination sometimes is because of the color of your skin. True?
I can't hear you too loud. Sir.
Okay, discrimination sometimes causes because the color of my skin is discrimination.
I think racial discrimination absolutely persists, yeah.
So is there white privilege?
Hell yeah, there's white privilege, yeah.
Okay, and what is white privilege?
White privilege is the opportunity to, for instance, not have to be presumed to stand in for everyone in your race. White privilege is the opportunity to take for granted that you're going to get home at night without getting shot by a cop. White privilege is the opportunity to walk into any rental office and be treated fairly, or at least not skeptically, to go to any neighborhood and rent a place. White privilege is the chance to be taken more seriously by employers. White privilege is linguistic, it's cultural, it's economic, it's pervasive.
Does it exist?
Yes, it absolutely exists. It much more than merely exists. It is everywhere. Yeah.
Intergenerational inherited. Okay.
That's huge. Yeah, David just shouted out. He's absolutely right. Inherited generational wealth. Discrimination has been building. It's worse every compounding generation. Thank you for raising the question. Yeah, you're absolutely right.
Okay.
I'm good, brother. How are you? We have one over here that you can take. Yeah.
Do you have a question, sir? Here, let me sanitize it for you. All right, did you have a question for Shahid? Yeah. Okay.
Hey, folks. I'm Bo. James Dean. 22 Vietnam. The year last is Bill's Thunder Flag. When they burned my records, the cops gave me the name Jerry Dean. Goddamn. You know what that means, Jack? They put black and white together. I made those A-D-I-O-U. Sometimes you are not here. See my empire? I built this shirt. You can even get the half of your earnings for a year. Cause I got none. See that? I'm South here in 19 85. I left an RV sitting there. Y'all should know me. I'm Dr. Hood with the medicine man.
Awesome.
Those vehicles up there on the list, those class cars are mine. I haven't been taken from me since I've been here.
Okay,
And I'm tired of it. So I want to ask you one question. Do you want to live or do you want to die?
Thank you for your question.
So I believe the essence of the question, he made himself clear at the end. The question is, do you want to live or do you want to die? That's an important question right now, actually.
I would like for all of us to have a chance to live.
Because Congress
I got a comment on that. Martin Luther King says, if it's not worth dying for, it's not worth living for. Am I right or wrong? If you want to die for moral rights, human rights, all right, then it's not worth living for if you're not willing to put your life on the line. I am my brother's keeper. Right or wrong?
I'm going to have to ask you to use the words.
Do we have any other questions that folks might have? Shout them out.
Yeah. Leave a black man alone.
We're moving on.
No,
Leave a brother alone.
no, I thought I answered your question. Did I not?
They just called me.
No, I'm so sorry. Did you have another question? I thought I answered it.
It ain't about Martin Luther King.
Okay.
Human rights.
It's not
Civil rights.
what's right.
Human rights.
It's all rights, man. Human rights and civil rights, they're all a part of the
Black people are
equation.
not getting human rights.
You're absolutely
I
right.
agree.
We are not getting human rights.
I absolutely agree with you.
And we fought for this country.
You're absolutely right.
And
You're absolutely right.
We worked hard to build ourselves, and then we still are denied some of the situations that we get.
Right, absolutely. Thank you.
It's worse than being denied. I mean, just to your point, I feel like to say that people are denied is too charitable. It's people are taken from, right? I mean, our system viciously preys on working people and families. And to your point, it's absolutely black communities and black families and black people, and it's working class people in addition to it in fewer ways, right? Class, interest, excuse me, bro. Maybe, thank you for your participation. We're glad you're here.
Tell me the white view.
The white view?
He's not white.
I'm not white, brother. You're not going to get the white view from me.
Native American?
I'm Pakistani.
Oh, okay.
You're not going to get the white view from me. You might ask Pelosi for the white view. Nancy Pelosi can give you the white view. That's
let's
Washington.
ask her. Let's ask her. Speaker Pelosi, can you please give us the white view?
Give me the white view.
Oh, wait, she's not here.
She's not here. There we go. There's the cricket.
Well, give me your white view.
I don't have a white view, brother. I'm running to liberate our communities from the oppression of corporate capital and exactly the dynamics that you're concerned about. I see the criminal justice system as a racist project. It's why I'm running for office.
And that's why I'm going to vote for you. Because you cannot ask for something, you got to demand it.
Hell yeah, you do.
You know what I mean?
That's
and
right.
When you stop demanding justice, that's when you lose your.
Was it Frederick Douglass who said power concedes nothing without a demand?
That's right. That's
yeah.
right. And you know what? I'm tired of asking.
Okay.
Right on.
It's time to demand.
Right on.
Justice. Anyway, you all right with me?
Right on.
Okay,
Right on.
All right.
I'm Santa Barbara.
Okay, welcome to town. We're glad you're here.
All right, awesome. We're gonna take 2 more questions. So I think
Can we get this ally over here?
for sure.
Thank you.
I wanted to know your opinion on the Jones Act and the status of Puerto Rico. What do you believe should be determined for the people?
I would support statehood, though I recognize statehood as an object that in Puerto Rico hasn't had majority support. So I'm particularly eager to support the self-determination of any people, including in Puerto Rico. I think statehood for territories, including Puerto Rico, DC, and Guam would make sense, both for those territories and the body politic. But again, I don't want to get out in front of the people there. Does that make sense? So my principal concern in Puerto Rico right now is just making sure that it gets the support and relief that it needs in the wake of the hurricanes that it hasn't gotten. And frankly, Well, the catastrophic one was 3, but there've been more since. I mean, this. And just so people know, do people remember the moment when Donald Trump showed up in Puerto Rico after a hurricane and started throwing paper towels around? It never got any better after that. Like that was a moment in the American news cycle, but that is the continuing reality in Puerto Rico, and it has been for years. And we owe U.S. citizens better than that. Thank you.
All right, we got so many questions still. I believe this gentleman over here has had his hand up for a long time. So why don't we?
I'll just yell at you.
Okay, he's just gonna yell it to me.
Do you have a plan, once the police have been defunded, that prevents cop abusers from being rehired or prevents racist cops from being hired in private security moving forward?
Okay, so the question is, so everybody can hear it, the question is, once police departments are defunded and we reduce our police forces, how do you prevent cops who have been abusive and racist and stuff like that? How do you prevent them from being hired into other similar positions like private security or other public service jobs?
That's a great question, and I want to be honest with you. I've answered the first part, but not the second part. You raised an opportunity there that we don't have an answer for yet, but I'd love to develop one. We did propose in 2018, and Congress has since supported, at least the House, though the Senate has not yet approved, a registry of violent police. The cop who killed George Floyd, the cop who killed Tamir Rice, both of them had been found guilty of previous escalation. If we had that kind of registry, both of those people would still be with us today. But to your point about private security, I just want to invite you to follow up with us. We don't have a proposal for that yet. I think it's really thoughtful. It makes sense. There absolutely should be restraint on the so-called public servants from serving in private industries where they have coercive opportunities.
Sir, we need to wear masks.
Yeah, do you want a mask, brother?
Excuse me, brother. Now, doing my history talk, there's never been a situation, okay? There's never been a situation, okay? No.
Yeah, let me sanitize it. Hold on.
There's never been a situation.
Okay, let me sanitize the mic. Just be patient. All right. So can you put the mask on?
I've heard this idea, and I wonder what you think of it. As it currently is, when a police officer kills somebody and the city is sued, whatever city it might be, the money comes out of the city coffers. What if the money came out of the police pension fund?
Yeah. Yeah, you're your question too. I might ask too, do you know if we have any more palm cards? Can we get those?
We have a lot of palm cards.
We should distribute those, yeah, there we go. So at the moment, to restate the question, when police are on the rare occasion found guilty of committing civil rights violations, the settlements for private lawsuits by those people's families, or those people if they're lucky enough to survive, usually come out of your tax dollars. They come out of the city general fund. They don't come from particularly the pension funds of police associations or individual police officers themselves. That would be a meaningful, a much more effective disincentive to escalate if police actually had to bear some cost when they, for instance, kill someone. At the moment, there's no accountability. Not only is there no penalty, but to the prior gentleman's question, they can get rehired by another police department, and if not that, some nightclub somewhere to run security for them at front door. So there's lots of opportunities, continuing opportunities for so-called public servants who abuse their positions, and whether it's through getting rehired as a police officer or private security or any of the other ways that people manage to evade accountability. We need to close those loopholes and make sure that killer cops and abusive cops pay penalties for their crimes.
All right. We have one more question from this gentleman.
My question is that there had never been a black police officer who has killed a white young man. Okay? Because the black police officer, he knows if he kills this white guy, that he will lose his job the next day. There has not been one recorded situation where a black cop has killed a white person, because he knows the rules and he knows that you don't kill white people and get away with it. No, has there been any historical thing where a black cop has killed a white guy? Anybody know any situation? No, no one. No one. See, you don't even know. Because what I'm trying to say is that black officers, we have a quota that we do not touch white people.
Okay, awesome. So,
And that's white privilege. Because you got people with AK-40s, NARA running around. And basically, what I'm trying to say is, I'm not trying to start any confusion though, but I'm just saying, black police officers have never been found guilty of killing a white man. Because he knows, okay? And the reason he knows this, he's gonna get fired the next day. There ain't gonna be no leave without pay, because most white officers who get fired, they go without pay, and they still survive. So what I'm trying to say is that discrimination is still here in America.
absolutely.
Okay? Now you can hide all you want to and do what you want to, but I'm gonna tell you, it's still a racist America.
Okay.
And when we got gender, sexual orientation, San Francisco, if you gay, you couldn't live in San Francisco if you were gay. You had to stay in the closet. You get my point?
Sir, absolutely. Everything you're saying
Does anybody
Yeah,
want to have a roving dance party to Pelosi's office? How does that sound?
I like the idea of a dance party.
Yeah, word.
Yeah.
Okay. I heard there was a mix I spun
I think we're gonna
year
have
or
a dance
two that we
party
were
now.
bumping before. I think we're going to put on some beats and maybe march. Does that sound good to folks? All right. The biggest difference between me and Nancy Pelosi is that I represent San Francisco, I represent our city and our visionary values, and she represents Wall Street.
Great. Can you tell us a little bit about your opinion on the Earn It Act?
The Earn It Act is a proposal in Congress that would threaten the human right to encryption and potentially encourage online tech platforms to censor their users. There's a critical part of the law on which the internet as we know it today has been built. It's Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act. The Earn It Act would restrict that part of the law and condition corporate tech platform immunity for user-generated speech based on those platforms' willingness to comply with the demands of national security agencies. And we need to put the human right to encryption and the human right to conscience, First Amendment principles, first. That's where our national security really adheres.
Obviously, a very big part of our life right now is coronavirus.
Yes.
And Pelosi was recently criticized for her ideas on how to handle that. How would you handle coronavirus?
The very first thing we need to do is to keep people in their homes, passing rent and mortgage relief. We need to expand paid sick leave to cover 100% of the workforce. And we need to make sure that if the economy needs to shut down to guard public health, that people don't feel compelled to go to work to put food on the table. That creates disease vectors. And we see the coronavirus revealing long-standing disparities, racial disparities, and other economic disparities in addition to that, that privilege some communities and leave others at risk of contagion and fatality rates that vastly eclipse the general baseline. And the key to getting on the other side of this pandemic is to put human needs first. That means universal health care. That means a universal basic income, $2,000 a month per person, at least as an emergency basis until the pandemic is over and the economy can reopen. How and who bears what costs in this crisis are public policy choices. And I'd like to steer public policy in a way to make sure that banks and corporations bear the brunt of the economic costs of the pandemic, recognizing both that they're better situated to bear those costs, and we have bailed them out before. And frankly, we will likely bail them out again.